Hello, I'm Alex and welcome to the History Chronicles. If you like our work, then please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel in return for exclusive perks, please visit our Patreon page. Now, on with the video. When was the Great Fire of London? How did it start? And how was it extinguished? Let's find out in today's episode of the History Chronicles. Today's History Chronicle concerns an event which occurred in September 1666, but which has left an indelible mark on the history of London. Beginning just after midnight on Sunday the 2nd of September 1666, and continuing at its worst until the following Wednesday the 5th of September, the Great Fire of London obliterated nearly the entire central part of the City of London. By the time it was put out, over 13,000 homes had been destroyed, as well as nearly 100 churches, including St. Paul's Cathedral, the foremost religious centre in the city. Additionally, the halls or headquarters of 52 of the city's leading mercantile companies were also obliterated, along with the Royal Exchange, the Customs House, and several city prisons. The old Roman walls and medieval walls and gates, some of which had been built 1,500 years earlier, were also nearly entirely destroyed in the disaster. This is the story of the Great Fire of London. In the mid-17th century, London had already begun to occupy the paramount position within the urban landscape of Britain, which it has held down to the present day. In 1500, the city had a population of perhaps as little as 60,000 people, but this quickly expanded in the 16th century, tripling in size to approximately 200,000 souls by 1600. The number of Londoners nearly doubled again by 1650, and would have been well in excess of 400,000 when the Great Fire occurred in 1666, had it not been for a horrific outbreak of bubonic plague throughout England in 1665. As a result, when the Great Fire struck the year after the plague year, the population of London is estimated to have been about 385,000 people. The city had been largely unplanned in its development. Central London, known as the City of London owing to its corporate status, and a region which legally remains a ceremonial county to this day, was a very small area within the old walls, which had been built at various points by the Romans in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and then during the Middle Ages by many Anglo-Saxon and Anglo-Norman monarchs. The city was largely confined to the north bank of the River Thames, and ran from the Tower of London in the east westwards to where Fleet Street is today. The northern extremity of this older part of the city reached the edges of Moorfields. Within this small expanse was to be found all of the main civic buildings in London, and the entirety of the business district in the 17th century. However, London had expanded greatly outside this walled area. Just some 90,000 of its inhabitants lived within the walled city during the 17th century, and by the 1660s the bulk of the population was living in large suburbs to the west of the city, towards the seat of government at Westminster, or across the River Thames on the south bank at Southwark. Because the city had expanded so quickly, there were many potential fire hazards on every street. Houses, having been hastily built for decades using timber and other highly flammable building material, royal directives had tried to prohibit these building practices during the 16th and 17th centuries, but to no avail. Because of these building practices, London was in many ways a tinderbox, just waiting to go up in flames if the wrong set of circumstances developed. That is exactly what occurred on the 2nd of September 1666. The origins of the fire are clear. It broke out just after 1 a.m. at the house of Thomas Fariner, a supplier of foodstuffs to the Royal Navy, on Pudding Lane, a small street near the very centre of the walled city. The fire evidently spread quickly in the house, and Fariner and his family, having become trapped upstairs, had to climb through a window to the house next door. A maidservant was too frightened to climb out of the upstairs window, and became the first victim of the Great Fire. Human error now entered into the equation. London did have a fire service of sorts in the 17th century, a kind of militia called the Trained Bands, who could be called upon in such emergencies. Members of this and the parish constables were soon at hand. Efforts were made to put out the flames using the stored water at a water tower at Cornhill in the city. However, when this failed, the constables decided to resort to the next tactic they had for combating large infernos. This was to collapse or effectively tear down and destroy the surrounding buildings to stop the fire from spreading any further. It is virtually certain that almost nobody would have ever heard of the fire which broke out at Thomas Farriner's house on the 2nd of September 1666 had the constables been allowed to do this. But in the midst of tackling the fire, the Mayor of London for 1666, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, showed up. He had been called on to agree to the destruction of the surrounding houses, but when Bloodworth arrived and assessed the situation, he loftily declared that a woman could piss out the fire. His real concern was that there would be large insurance claims against the city if the surrounding buildings were destroyed. Driven by strong easterly winds as dawn turned to morning on the 2nd of September, the fire quickly spread through Thames Street and along the factories by the river, where it reached stored goods such as coal and wood that acted as massive incendiaries. By midday on Sunday, it was clear that the blaze was completely out of control. By that afternoon, the King, Charles II, had been informed of the situation at Westminster. He proceeded to the city himself to view the fire firsthand, and then ordered that fire stations be set up throughout London to try and contain it. It was already too late. Efforts were made on the Sunday night to collapse large numbers of buildings to prevent the blaze spreading any further, but all to no avail. It expanded into the northern parts of the walled city on Monday. By Tuesday it had destroyed St. Paul's Cathedral before spreading outside the western walls of the city and heading down Fleet Street towards Temple Bar. We are particularly fortunate to have excellent first-hand accounts of the Great Fire, none greater than that found in the diaries of Samuel Peeps, the administrator of the Royal Navy and a senior official in Charles II's government. In his memoir, Peeps provides a bird's-eye account of how the fire was spreading and the damage it was wreaking across London from the vantage point he took up in the Tower of London. In the days that followed, he describes his own efforts, and those of his fellow Londoners, to move their possessions from their houses out of the walled city. As the fire raged through Monday and Tuesday, there really was nothing that could be done to tackle it using 17th century firefighting techniques. At one point, the flames reached upwards of 1,250 degrees Celsius. With this heat, it was not even possible to get close enough to the fire to try to control it, though the city militia continued to create fire banks where they could, in the hope that the wind, which had whipped around since Sunday morning, would drop and quell the flames. In the midst of their helplessness, London's people began looking for someone to blame. But rather than implicating the mayor and his idiotic decision to not pull down the buildings surrounding Farriner's house, they instead did what many people in societies do in such circumstances. They looked for some foreigners to blame. At the time of the Great Fire, England was at war with the Dutch Republic and France, in what is known as the Second Anglo-Dutch War. Consequently, London's communities of Dutch and French expats now became the targets of angry mobs, with several of these innocent victims being blamed as arsonists who had started the fire. As a result, they were lynched by their fellow Londoners. It is possible that in the end, these xenophobic outbursts resulted in more deaths than the actual fire itself. Eventually, it ended. The wind finally died down on Tuesday evening and the morning of Wednesday the 5th of September. This, combined with the fire banks which had been built, ensured that the worst of the fire was over by Wednesday evening. Although small fires continued to smoulder until the following Sunday the 9th of September, when heavy rains fell on London and put out the remaining vestiges of the Great Fire. As we have seen, the physical damage to the city and the suburbs to the west of the walls was almost total. The fire had destroyed virtually everything, such that in his diaries, Peeps records how, in the aftermath of the inferno, he climbed the steeple of Barking Church and looked down on a city which he described as the saddest sight of desolation that I ever saw. Incredibly, the death toll from the fire itself does not appear to have been very great, perhaps as few as 8 or 9 people. However, the number of those who perished as a result of the Great Fire was probably considerably more. For starters, many Dutch and French people were lynched, and quite probably killed, as conspiracy theories about them having set the fire circulated. Moreover, it is quite plausible that the poor and homeless who might have died in the fire were not counted among the dead at the time, as they did not have official residences in the city. And, in addition, the Great Fire left tens of thousands of people homeless and living in makeshift camps outside London throughout the winter of 1666. And many must have died from disease, the cold, or even hunger due to the circumstances in which they found themselves. All in all, there is little doubting the immense scale of the demographic and physical destruction which the Great Fire unleashed throughout London in early September of 1666. There was now a city to be rebuilt, and within weeks detailed proposals were being submitted to King Charles II by figures such as the acclaimed English polymath and architect Christopher Wren. The result of these early deliberations was the Rebuilding Act of 1667, a general scheme to rebuild the city with houses of stone and tiled roofs. Simultaneously, a fire court was set up to handle insurance claims lodged by the city's inhabitants and business community, while a new tax was introduced on coal being imported into London to begin acquiring funds for the reconstruction of the capital. Despite these positive initial steps, progress was slow. The war with the Dutch did not come to an end until the late summer of 1667, and supply lines for building materials were interrupted as a result of it. But it was not until 1672 that the vast majority of the housing which had been destroyed in 1666 was rebuilt. The livery companies had rebuilt their halls by this time as well, and major civic buildings such as the Royal Exchange and the Customs House also came back to use in the early 1670s. Thus, within 5 or 6 years of the Great Fire, much of central London had been rebuilt to a better standard than it had been before the conflagration. The great exception, of course, was St. Paul's Cathedral. Christopher Wren designed the new church and oversaw its construction. Building work did not commence until 1675, and although services were first held here as early as 1697, they would take until 1710, 35 years after its commencement, for Wren's design to be brought to completion. As anyone who has stood in the general vicinity of its 85-metre dome in central London will attest, it was worth the wait. And so, while the Great Fire ravaged London in 1666, perhaps its greatest legacy is the architectural imprint it left on England's capital in the aftermath. You have been watching the History Chronicles. We'd love to know what you think of the Great Fire of London. Please let us know below, and if you enjoyed our video, please give us a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Also, if you would like to support our work going forward, please visit our Patreon page. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the History Chronicles.